My name is Jason Toroff. It's my pleasure and honor to be here in front of you all, be able to speak today. Today we're going to be talking about the characteristics of God series, and today we're going to be focusing on powerful. Who doesn't like powerful? Who doesn't want to feel powerful? I think we all pretty much do. I really enjoy doing this. It kind of helped reshape my perception of what power actually is, because I think I started this with a very traditional view of power with it, and I think you kind of see this as you go. As I go through this, kind of like also my journey of like discovering what real power is in life. So maybe you'll pick up on that. But I want to start with a more traditional example of what power is. If you can go ahead and throw on that first slide there. If you can't pronounce that name, I don't blame you. That name is Halvor Julius Bjornsson. You may recognize him in that picture because that was a very popular show, Game of Thrones. He was known as the Mountain in that character for obvious reasons, because he is a mountain of a man. Halvor was considered, I don't think he no longer holds the title, but he was considered one of the strongest men in the world. He had set multiple records of weightlifting, including, I wanted to share this one, the elephant dead bar lift of 1,044 pounds. I'm 45-ish pounds. That's like bench pressing or deadlifting, dead barring 4 lift, or doing 4 of me. That's incredible. He is the first and only person to have held the title for all 3 things at once, which is the Arnold Strongman Classic, the Europe's Strongest Man, and the World's Strongest Man competitions. He holds numerous strongman titles from multiple strength federations. He can bench press up to 551 pounds, and a normal squat is about 1,014 pounds. I don't know about you, to me that's incredible, that somebody can do something like that. I mean, this guy could literally tow a tow truck if he wanted to. He's that strong with him. But this is only the tip of the iceberg with it, because when I started doing comparisons, we're like, wow, that's a human, I wonder what other animals are like. A brown bear can lift 1,102 pounds. Gorillas, I was really impressed by this. Gorillas, by the way, are my favorite animals. I love gorillas. I love watching videos on them. Can't get enough of them. They can lift 4,409 pounds with it. But that's not even the tip of the iceberg with it, because an elephant can carry up to 19,841 pounds. That's incredible right there. Obviously, these are very powerful creatures that we're talking about today, and yet they can't even begin to touch on God's power, which just gets a reminder to me about how small I really am in comparison of things. Let's go ahead and throw on that next slide there. So what you're looking at right there, you probably can't read it. It's the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine, volume 81. It was written July 1988. I was thinking about, well, what's a great example of God's power? And just the idea of Sodom and Gomorrah. You know, we all are familiar with that story, right? They were just full of sin, and God decides we're just going to wipe them out, kind of thing, start over. And so Lot and his wife are escaping, and Lot's wife turns around and turns into a pillar of salt. I was thinking, pillar of salt, why is that standing out to me? I was like, oh, the Oppenheimer film. How many of you have seen that Oppenheimer film? Well, it's a really interesting film. You should go see it. It's about the creation of the atom bomb. And it's mind-boggling because you see hundreds of scientists working together to create the first atom bomb. And they weren't even sure it would go off when they first tested it. There was like, it's a 50-50 chance it'll actually do something with it or not. But this guy right here, I forgot his name, but he wrote about why he believes that whatever happened to Sodom and Gomorrah was the equivalent of an atom bomb going off. And that, the clue is in the fact that Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt right there, because that's probably what they would conceptualize it back then, not understanding, what atoms are or the effects of radiation and whatnot. So in their mind, she just turned into salt with it. But I want to read an excerpt from that. It's the very last paragraph in the article. It says, "Thus, by turning around in her direction of flight, Miss Lot exposed herself instantly to stresses that generate immediate enormous escalations in concentrations of calcium and CO2, so that the critical limits specified in the equation, don't worry about the equation, were exceeded overwhelmingly and instantaneously. Internal, massive, and pervasive crystallization of galactite followed immediately. Miss Lot died instantly in rigor calcium carbonatus and turned into a rigid block of calcite. Since the prevailing winds of the Dead Sea always carry along a spray of salt, which is accumulated on this pillar, succeeding generations of modern times have testified that the column is a block of salt. Thus, once again, we see how modern science serves to corroborate and elucidate medical events described in the Bible with it. God can split an atom with the snap of his fingers. And that, I don't even think, is the tip of the iceberg for God. I mean, we could even talk about the Big Bang Theory. Scientists' theory of how the Big Bang started was everything was contained in this small little ball, and then he released it, and everything comes out from it. The power of God is incredible, and that's really what we're going to be talking about today when we talk about God and his power, because I think there's a lot of good things that we can learn from it. If you go ahead and put on the next slide here, you'll understand what this is in a second as I read this. This is from Exodus 19, starting in verse 14. To give you a little, in case you're not familiar with this section of the Bible, Moses, one of the, really the first prophet, is leading the people out of Egypt. They go through a lot of trials and tribulations. And this is an excerpt from an event that happened as they were leaving. In verse 14, bear with me, it is a little bit long. It says, "After Moses had gone down the mountain to the people, he consecrated them and washed their clothes. Then he said to the people, 'Prepare yourselves for the third day, abstain from sexual relations.' On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning with a thick cloud over the mountain." This is referring to Mount Sinai. And a very loud trumpet blast. Can you imagine that? You're just outside and you hear this just like incredibly loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. So let me just stop right there for a second. I was trembling yesterday because I won't say it was a man cold, but I was recovering from a COVID booster shot, and I was trembling maybe shivering is the right word, I don't know, with it. But I know times that I have trembled is when my body has experienced tremendous amounts of adrenaline going on. Have you ever had that where you had so much adrenaline, you're just shaking like that? That's what these people are going through just at the sight of this, which I don't blame them. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountainside trembled violently. As the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. The Lord descended on top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses went up, and the Lord said, "Go down and warn the people, so they do not force their way to see the Lord, and many of them perish." Just going near God would cause them to die, just flat out die. And even the priests who approach the Lord must consecrate themselves, or the Lord will break out against them. So Moses said to the Lord, "The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai because you yourself warned us. Put limits around the mountain and set it apart as holy. We don't need to read the last of that, but let's go ahead and go to Exodus 20. And if you want to go ahead and throw on the next slide, too. So be thinking about this as we read. When people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain and smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, Speak to us yourself, and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us, or we will die. Moses said to the people, Do not be afraid. God has come to test you, so that the fear of God will keep you from sinning. Pay attention to that one. Remember that one. The people remained at a distance. Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. I feel like every story of Moses that I see, they always do such injustice to what actually happened there, because what the people at the time were witnessing was this incredibly mysterious, just terrifying event that was going on. Nobody really understood, except for maybe Moses, what was happening there. But his power causes fear. A lot of people, we love the hippie Jesus who just wants to give everybody hugs and high fives and whatnot. But that's the thing. It's like trying to go up and give a hug to like a nuclear bomb. Like, God is just so powerful. It deserves respect from him. Anybody who sees God or speaks to one of his angels, they all fall down trembling in fear. Think about that. Even as angels, people are falling down. I remember I used to watch this show with my mom called Touched by an Angel. Have you guys seen that show? You remember that show? That was an old show. But they would always come, and I remember it was like an Irish angel. I don't know why she was Irish, but whatever. But they're always so warm and gentle. And I'm not saying angels aren't. They could be. I don't know. But just that idea of the power that exudes from them is terrifying to experience with it. I think it just helps us to reconceptualize what this all means to us. But I also think about what it says up here about God has come to test you so that the fear of God will keep you from sinning. And I think that's so important, because life without consequences is pretty reckless. I am a big video game player, one of the biggest games ever made and released. Maybe some of you younger people will know it. Grand Theft Auto. That's a game where you just kind of live out all your gangster fantasies in that game. You do whatever you want, and it's funny watching people drive in that, because nobody ever stops at the traffic lights. They're always plowing through cars and driving on sidewalks and knocking over lamps and mailboxes. But that's what life is like when there are no consequences. You just do whatever you want, and none of it matters, kind of thing. But God is saying, no, it does matter. Life does have consequences, and if you don't have fear of those consequences, you will become a reckless person in it. And God has us experience fear to protect us from getting hurt. I think about the idea of, what parent hasn't told a child not to touch a hot stove, right? And kids, they don't know any better. They're like, oh, that's weird. Let me investigate that. And he doesn't know that the stove is bad to touch, but he does know mommy or daddy will get very angry with them if they touch that hot stove. It's not the stove they fear, it's mommy and daddy that they fear. When I was a kid, I was at my grandparents' house. I was little. I don't know how old I was at the time, but I remember they had a fire before I got there. I guess they were just burning trash or something. But I go back into the backyard, and nobody was around, and I was like, wow, that wood is white. That's weird. Let me touch that. And I screamed and howled. And it was just like this thing on my finger, and it lasted for a couple of weeks because nobody was around to tell me no to it. And I think that's what it's like with God, is God knows that if we don't fear him and we pursue a reckless lifestyle, we too will hurt ourselves and hurt other people around us with it. I don't think it's about God just intentionally trying to scare us, but I think that's a natural response to happen when you're around something so powerful. It's just terrifying to even try to comprehend with it. But just like parents with children, God can become upset and angry when he sees his child that he loves hurting themselves. But I want you guys to think about this. Everybody there is afraid and terrified except for one person, Moses. Moses was the only one that stayed calm in that, and he was the only one who was comfortable enough to approach God and have a conversation with him. Why is that? That's what I thought. Why could Moses do it when no one else could? I understand they talked before, but to experience the power of God in front of you like that, what was it that could make him do that? And the only thing that made sense in my mind was because he'd already had an established relationship with God. And I think that was the whole point of him, was to help everyone else really begin to understand who God is. And the first thing that they learned was God was powerful. That was the very first lesson that they learned going through this experience with them. God wants a loving relationship with you. He does want you to fear him, but I think it's really rooted in his love for us. Exodus 14, verse 19. And this really is where that slide comes into play. It kind of threw it up early. Then the angel of God, who had been traveling in front of Israel's army, withdrew and went behind them. So, like before, this is they're fleeing the Egyptians, and obviously the Pharaoh doesn't like that, so he's sending his army, because who doesn't want free labor, I guess. And so they are literally running with the army chasing them from behind. Let me start from the beginning. Then the angel of God, who had been traveling in front of Israel's army, withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of cloud also moved from in front and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. Throughout the night, the cloud brought darkness to one side and light to the other side, so neither went near the other all night long. You think about that. You put that slide back up. I actually had an AI come up with that. I just kind of gave it a prompt and a command based off the stuff that I was reading in here of like, what would this even look like, kind of thing. And that's the image that it came up with it. Of just like, could you imagine following that and being told that is God, your Savior, manifesting itself on earth? That's wild to think about. Like, I wonder how hot that fire was, like for the people in the very front of that long line there, like were they like sweating? It was so hot up there. I don't know. But I think when we think of God, I don't think we think of this. Yet for the Israelites, that's probably how they thought of God back then, was just this powerful, overwhelming force. And not only that, but he used that power to protect the Israelites, because he stood in between the Egyptians and the Israelites all night long, so that they would not get crushed and killed and slaughtered with it. That's the kind of thing we want to think about when we talk about God's power is, yeah, he's powerful, and yeah, it's terrifying, but he wants to use that power to help you in your life through your struggles, because that really is who God is. Let's go back to that section. Let's start in verse 21. And if you can, put on the next slide for me. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove back the sea with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. He jammed the wheels of their chariots so they had difficulty driving. And the Egyptians said, "Let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." These are what the Egyptian soldiers were saying here. And I just think, man, this is an incredible scene. Like, you think about, I don't know if, I would highly doubt, at least, any of us have ever had to run in terror for our lives. If you have, I'm sorry about that. I couldn't imagine with it. I also can't imagine what it's like for a group of people to be running in terror for their lives, knowing that if they get caught, they'll be at best put back to slavery, at worst killed and raped, because that's what soldiers do in war. I would imagine there's a lot of panic, hysteria, and fear going on. There are even scenes of like the Israelites starting to like blame and attack Moses in the midst of their fears with it. But God was faithful. He stood in the way of the Egyptians all night, and he threw them into disarray, to the point where even people who weren't following God and didn't even believe in him were like, wow, he's fighting for them. And I want you guys to be thinking about that for yourselves. He's fighting for you. God is using his power for the Israelites to help them lead a better life. But I really think it's the same for us. He hasn't stopped with that. There's a really cool book called From Shadows to Reality, and it talks about that scene of the people passing through the Red Sea and just how that is imagery and symbolism for baptism. They were leading a life in sin, but they were moving away to a life of freedom, to a place where God had put them in life. I just think that's really cool with it. God has been fighting for us since the creation of Adam and Eve in the very beginning, and he's fighting for you now. He's in the fight with you of overcoming sin in your life, whether it's sexual immorality, drugs, anger, hate, selfishness, you name it. He's still fighting for you because he's trying to save you from a life of destruction, just like he was saving the Israelites back then. He is fighting so that you can be in a saved relationship with Jesus. It kind of reminds me, I've been on this kick. My wife will laugh at me because I tell everybody about the show now. But there's a show on Netflix that recently came on called Suits, and it's about these lawyers dealing with like corporate law and whatnot. It's a drama is really what it is. But there's a guy named Harvey in it, and Harvey is arrogant, bullheaded at times, but he's also extremely loyal, and he fights for his friends no matter what kind of thing. And I think that's God right there. He fights for you whether you want his help or not, kind of thing. He'll still fight for you with it. And I often think that we are the child that yells no when the parent tries to help them, kind of thing. We resist that because just like the Israelites have struggled throughout their story in the Bible as being a rebellious nation and a rebellious people, we are the exact same. We are rebellious. We want to tell God no, and even push him away when he's trying to build a relationship with us, kind of thing. Point 3, and this is something I want you guys to think about, is how God's power can help people today. I really believe, I know you hear it from time to time from people, it's like, wow, God really changed. He's so different in the New Testament than the Old Testament. And that's far from the truth. God is exactly the same. He has not changed at all. He has not changed since he was walking with Adam in the Garden of Eve. He has not changed since he was leading the people out of Israelite. He had not changed when he sent his son, Jesus Christ, down on the earth to die for us. Time and time again, God keeps fighting it for us to reach out for a relationship with us. God doesn't give up on us no matter how rebellious we are. And this is the thing that I think what God's real power is. I showed you a lot of incredible scenes from the Bible. I would love to see a movie on some of this stuff. I'm a big movie guy. I would love to see that in film, see what people could come up with. But I don't think that's his real power, though. Because as I was thinking about it, I was like, man, God he's stubborn. Like he just doesn't give up on people no matter what. And I just like, you know what? Maybe I've been focusing on the wrong thing. Maybe the real power of God isn't the scary things that he can do or the impressive things that he can do. Maybe the real power of God is that his love is unending for us, and that no matter what, he doesn't give up on any of us, kind of thing. I don't think any of us can really match that level of love that God has for us. I think his power is in the ability to transform our lives, to have us turn away from sin, to see and look at sin differently and go, no, I don't want that anymore. I was I'm a big video game guy, and I was playing a game, and this character in the game, he's very intelligent, he studies a lot, and that kind of stuff. His brother is not that. His brother he's silly, he likes to play, and that's all he wanted to do is just spend time with his older brother because he looked up to his older brother kind of thing. But his older brother didn't make time for him kind of thing. And then the younger brother dies. And the older brother is sitting there looking at the spot where his younger brother used to sit and go, none of this mattered. The power I accumulated, the knowledge I gained, none of it mattered. All I wish I could do was just play a game with my brother again. And I think that's touching on the level of love that God has for us. God wants to use his power to help you. Jeremiah 29, verse 11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. That's God's dream for us today, is to give you hope and a future in your life with it. No matter how good you think life is, it's meaningless without God in it. And if you believe in God and if you love in God, the only thing you can do for the people that you care about is point them towards Christ. Point them towards God. Because you don't have the power to change anyone. I don't have the power to change anyone. I'm a therapist. That's like my job, quote unquote, to do that kind of thing. But I tell people all the time, I don't have the power to change you, and you're not a car. I don't get to switch out a part in you and suddenly you're fine again, kind of thing. But God does. He does have the power to transform us from the inside. And I think if we really love people, that's what we would point them to. I think a really great practical for that too is doing a little bit of what I was doing today. Taking our interests and our passions and our desires and connecting them back to God. I really believe that God is always communicating and talking to us. There was this song, I was in college, I think the name of it is like Keep Leading Love or something like that. Anybody know what I'm talking about? All right, well, maybe one of these days I can convince Jeff to let me play the song for you guys. But anyways, the song was about this girl and her boyfriend. But as I was listening to the lyrics, I'm like, no, it's not. This song perfectly encapsulates what it's like to be in a loving relationship with God, because she was singing about like, everyone around me thinks I'm going crazy because I love this guy so much, and I just keep bleeding love for him over and over and over, even though it's hurting me, kind of thing. And I'm like, this is really a song about our relationship with God. It's just we love him that much that people think we're nuts, kind of thing. But it's doing that throughout, whether it's media, social media, or things that we experience in life. We can use these things to show people and point to the people that we care about. This is what God's like. This is the level of love that God has for us with it. If we can connect life back to God, we can help show other people who God is in his heart towards them. I couldn't find a good picture, otherwise I would have thrown it up there. But, we have those signs out there. I was not here this morning. I usually put those signs out there. I don't know who did. Maybe it was Jeff. I don't know. But it's a sign literally pointing people to church, kind of thing. And I was thinking, that's really what we should be. We should be a sign pointing people back to God, because God is the one that's going to have the power, the real power, to make us into better people. So thank you guys so much for listening to me today. I appreciate you all, and I think we're going to have a song next.